Hello everyone, welcome to my live on talking about how to solve arguments with your partner. For this live, I will be putting this onto IGTV later, and it is my intention to talk about the kinds of discussions and problems you may be having with a loved one, family member, friend, how to work through them, and even figuring out if you can work through them. And I'm going to give you a spoiler alert right now. The answer is not going to be communicate better, because in some cases, communicating better with someone is actually not going to work out. And it's really important to have discernment over what kind of fight you're having, who you're having it with, and if this is something that is even solvable between you and the person that you're with. So, to start off with, I think it's really important to talk about the two kinds of arguments that you can have with the person who you're with. And for the sake of argument, let's just call it, say between you and someone who's reasonably healthy, right? Typically, there are two kinds. There's the kind where you have something that's bothering both of you and it's solvable, meaning that you're having an issue about something like where to go for dinner, what you want to do for your plans on the weekend, how you're going to work through an upcoming wedding that might be causing a clash between you and work on the weekend. And these sort of discussions might be relevant for you with your partner, because obviously you both want to maintain a life but also do things together. And it's important to understand that those kind of situations where you're chatting it out with your partner and you're really trying to figure out how you can best both work together is a case of what I call a fixable or solvable problem. And that really comes down to you both being able to talk it through. There might be something else too, which is a common one, which is a situation where you don't like something about your partner. You might be in a situation where your partner does something that really, it gets you to a place where you're really bothered by a behavior they have. And I'm not talking like an abusive behavior directed at you or like an egregious red flag, like they may have a very manipulative part of them that, forces itself out in certain situations. No, what I'm talking about is more just, they do something that, you may not be used to. Like they talk about, say, for example, they might talk about something like porn. They might talk about their previous love lives. They may talk about situations where they've been in experiences that you haven't had and it makes you uncomfortable. They may even talk to people harshly. And this sort of content that they give you bothers you. It upsets you. And you get into this line of thinking of feeling like, well, if only they could do this, then things would be better. If only they didn't, have this one quality that I don't like, then maybe everything would be perfect. And if you are the kind of person who likes the idea of who someone could be versus than who they are, then this is where this is going to be really helpful for you. It's important to understand that the person you are with is exactly who they are, and it's really healthy to come to a place of acceptance around that. Sometimes that means acknowledging the fact that our partners will not have traits and qualities that we like and are maybe compatible for us, because we're rarely ever going to have someone who's 100% fit for us. Like, that's just not realistic. It's about understanding what we want to be able to put up with, and also understanding what are some things that we don't like that we can accept and put up with. And if someone's not doing, so for example, your partner is doing something, that you don't like, but it isn't egregious. Like, for example, they're not physically abusing you. They're not manipulating or gaslighting you, or they're not doing anything that compromises your values. That's a really good opportunity to ask yourself, okay, well, is this something that I can live with? Personally, if I had a partner who was unable to sit with my emotions when I was going through a hard time, I would find it hard to try and bring them up to speed to get to a place where they could, sit with my emotions. So I think it's really important to understand that context is really important. Is this an issue that's, going to be a deal breaker for you? If not, then journaling out and really asking yourself the question, what, do I need to do in order to accept this situation? And be honest. If you can't, that's okay. That's not an indictment against you. It's not a problem. It just means, well, if you can't accept this, what do you need to do? And maybe that's having a conversation with your partner and saying, okay, well, this is now starting to trigger me. And in order for me to better work with you on this, how can we work through this in order to make me feel safe without me wanting to change you? And that's probably going to take some time and effort, and maybe it won't work and you either will or won't feel better off the back of it. But that's the key thing, is understanding how you feel about it. Because if you don't feel good about it, well, then that's an opportunity for then you to ask yourself, is this the right relationship for me? And that's a hard question to ask yourself, but sometimes the hard questions are the best ones to ask ourselves, because at the end of the day, if they impact our enthusiasm, our inspiration, and also our joy in a relationship, that's quite severe. So we need to be very mindful of how another person's energy and influence is impacting us. This nicely leads on to a very important point, which is that in some arguments, problems that may arise with you and your partner, you will never solve these issues. And it's important to understand that these are the things where radical acceptance and also honesty for yourself are truly important. I'm talking about the situation where, for example, you are in a loving relationship with your partner, but they have one of the most egregious, one of the most disruptive, intrusive families, and the family of your partner just can't leave well enough alone. They have to know everything about what your children are up to. They don't have good boundaries. They want to control you. And your partner, who loves you dearly, also loves their family very much, and also wants everyone to get along when it's not ever going to happen. This is the situation where, unfortunately, you have to come to a place of accepting the fact that this is outside of your sphere of influence. If there is a pattern of behavior where you can't, change it, you can't control it, you realize if only this could be better, then this may be able to work, of course. But at this stage, it is what it is. So the question then boils down to, well, how do you work through that? The first part of that is obviously having, if in this particular example, you might go to family therapy. You might engage, individually and be like to yourself, okay, what is it that I need in order to be in a healthy relationship? And, how do I want to feel? Because if you feel like you're regressing and feeling anxiety, depression, because you are just trying to pull teeth to play with the family that's not being helpful for you, then naturally it's probably going to feel really bad. And you've got to ask yourself the question, is this worth it? Because being with toxic family members from another partner who don't want to change may actually be the tipping point where you realize, I just can't be in this relationship and it's not working for me. You also have to accept the fact too that many arguments will never be solved. And if you can't accept the fact that these arguments can't be solved, then you're going to stay stuck in a situation which will drain you of your energy, your enthusiasm, and your love for that relationship. And it's important, basically, from what I'm trying to share with this first portion of my live, is to understand that not every argument is the same, not every problem is the same. They require different I don't even want to say solutions, but they require different methods for working through them, and it's got to be in alignment with your values and better understanding how you want to proceed in these sort of situations too. Because a one-size-fits-all communication is the key is simply not going to work out. You really have to understand what kind of issue you're dealing with, and also how to best approach it for yourself to the point where you're like, okay, pieces are restored, I am, in a good place. Because realistically speaking, every argument in and of itself or problem that comes up organically is a wonderful opportunity to help establish trust between you and the person that you're with, and also help you get to a place where you feel more comfortable and also more at peace with your partner, knowing that they have your back and you can work together. It's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be a situation which is able to be navigated with the calmest of words. You are going to trigger each other to hell and back sometimes, and it's about accepting and understanding that that is how relationships work, within reason, of course. And we're going to talk about the extremes in a hot minute, but it's important to understand that when you are in a reasonably healthy relationship and you are talking it through, you will step on each other. That brings me on to the second portion of this live, which is talking about the extremes, which is when you're working with different kinds of people. So what I illustrated before was when you're working with a situation where it's reasonably healthy people, as I would say. You know, people who can communicate it out within reason and do want to discuss their insecurities and also their non-solvable problems with their partners in a way that, you know, can be explored to the best of its ability. When you are working with someone who has unhealthy patterns of behavior, that is a different kind of story altogether. For example, if you are interacting with someone who is emotionally unavailable, typically someone who has an avoidant pattern of behavior, and for those who don't know what that means, it means someone who can't clearly articulate their feelings and would rather avoid having these conversations. You go to one partner, hey, I'd really like to, talk about what it would be like to date you. And then they come back with, oh, it's too early to talk about that. Or why are you rushing me? I don't feel comfortable when you have these conversations. They may not even say that. They may even say something more like, you're pressuring me to be with you. And they'll throw it back to you and make you feel like you've stepped on eggshells. You're forcing them into something they don't want. But I want to be very clear that that kind of language is very emotionally immature. People with emotional unavailability are quite emotionally stunted and usually have a very one-dimensional characteristic to their emotional wealth and their emotional bank, their intuition bank, as I like to call it. So typically they react out of fear and also out of react out of the fear of losing their independence. And consequently, that can make you, the recipient, feel understandably anxious, which is why we usually have what's called the avoidant and anxious trap, where you're with someone who really, makes you feel the butterflies, you love this person, you're intensely passionate towards this person, but you also worry a lot about how your actions make that person feel because you're worried about losing that person. So I guess to give this to a really strong example of how to navigate a situation with someone who has avoidant patterns of behavior or is emotionally unavailable, let's use the example I just gave. Getting into a relationship with one of them. It's going to be like pulling teeth, big time, and it's not really going to work out in a lot of cases, or it's like a ticking time bomb. It's going to eventually get to a point where, you realize this is just not going to work out. So let me give you the gradient for it, because there is a bit of a spectrum for this. When you are with someone who is very emotionally unavailable, someone who may work a very busy schedule, someone who, may even overwork or has impulsive addictive patterns of behavior, and they are, engaging, funny, witty, you love hanging out with them, and they're so much fun. They're the class clown, the troublemaker, but you enjoy hanging around with them because it just gives you a sense of freedom that you didn't have when you were younger. You are probably getting a lot of your unmet needs in this person in a way that you didn't probably have in childhood. So that's obviously a conversation for another day. But on a more serious conversational note, you'll find that when you're trying to transition from the honeymoon phase, which is going to be intense as hell, you run into some serious problems. One of which is they'll throw back a lot of their desire to be in an official relationship onto you, claiming that you're being needy, that it's too soon, you don't know them well enough, that they may have a bad side of them that you haven't seen yet and they don't want you to see it, or that they don't think that they're ready for a relationship, or that it would be unfair to enter into a relationship because they don't want to promise something that they can't deliver. And this is where there is no more painting the house red than it gets. Like, that person has, in a very poor way, articulated that they are uncomfortable at the idea of going into a relationship. And there really is nothing you can do about it. That person feels deeply shameful, conflicted, fearful of the idea of getting any closer. And it's not because they're necessarily a committophobe. It may also be because they have very genuine and justified fear of getting close to people because they've been hurt in the past. And it's important to understand that these kind of individuals need a lot of therapy, a lot of work with me, but also need to understand that they would need to go super duper slowly in order to feel comfortable with the idea of getting into a relationship. But even then, because of the chemistry involved and the anxiety that comes with it when you're with someone like this, you will feel like you're putting in all the work for this person. You're trying to make this work and elevate it to where you feel like it should be, and you don't want to lose them, that you will probably end up with a lot of resentment. Typically, when you're dating someone who has these patterns of behavior, if they didn't break up or ghost you or, leave you, this kind of behavior will eventually come out in the full relationship. You may find that the individual that you're dating just gets to a place where they feel incredibly challenged at the idea of wanting to share with you deep moments. They may even be physically distant from you. You might say things like, we don't physically, connect like a real couple. And they'll go, yes, we are. We're connecting all the time. When it's like they hug you twice a week when you're used to having more physical intimacy. And that kind of disparity feels weird for you, but normal for them, because for them, they want to feel safe by being away from other people. This sort of dynamic is very hard to break, and it's essentially like trying to adult an emotional toddler through their own sense of security, their own emotional range. Many of their emotions they probably won't be able to identify with because they haven't really been able to feel safe expressing it. God forbid they express anger, because that's a bad emotion, and people don't express their anger is probably a line that goes into their heads because they've had it pummeled into them as a child. And they may even have the belief that nobody cares about their thoughts and feelings, so God forbid they actually talk to you about it because they're worried that you won't give a shit about it. So when it comes to solving arguments with people such as this, it's going to be very one-sided. These are the individuals who will probably break up with you in the honeymoon phase because it's just too much for them, and they don't even have the language to usually describe what's going on. I want to make it very clear, as I've said countless times, it's not because they don't love you, it's not because they don't have a genuine interest for you, it is because they do not have any outlet for saying, I am really scared of getting any closer to you, and I'm really, really ashamed at how this might hurt you because of what you might then do to me. Their only way of communicating that is to leave. And they may even use excuses like, oh, well, sometimes it's best not to tell the other person, because they're so worried about how you might react to what they would have to say. And so they may use excuses like I used before, which is, oh, it's just too soon. You're too much. It's just too difficult for me to be in a relationship. And ironically enough, they may get into a relationship very shortly after. But that is a conversation for a whole nother time. And it's not really one that I want to talk about now. But you, in this moment, may feel like, oh, okay, well, firstly, you've made a decision on behalf of the relationship, thanks. And even if you're dating, I don't care if you've not officialized a relationship, you are in a relationship of sorts. And that person has decided to, make all the decisions between the two of you in terms of where this goes or does not go, as it is. And so when you're with someone like that, good luck negotiating, because communication does require negotiation. And when someone's not willing to come to the table, it's one thing to be able to point out to someone, I'm sensing that there is a little bit of fear, maybe anxiety around this. They will clam up and also freak out even more, because they would rather face a volcano erupting than be put in a room where someone points out the obvious with their emotions, because having fear and anger is considered a weakness to people like this, and they would rather not express their vulnerabilities because that makes them feel like they're inferior. So really what I'm getting at is to say that good luck when you're in a relationship with someone like that. Please don't beat yourself up if, they make changes to the relationship without your permission. It's going to feel like shit, and you're allowed to grieve and mourn that experience and get to a place where you don't personalize it, because this is just the way these people operate. And also understand too, and this is worthy of another conversation or a live or a podcast episode, that it is not your fault that they made the decisions that they made, that in order for them to advance to the next level would require years and years of more emotional labour and development to work through their fears and also their issues. You're actually at a level that's far more advanced than they are, emotionally speaking, and they're not ready to meet you at it. Which is why, ironically enough, they often date someone who, for all intents and purposes, is emotionally at the same level as them, or lower, because they feel more secure inside of themselves. So eventually you'll get to a stage where you can see the full picture and understand and appreciate it, but for now, mourn the hell out of that relationship, because it's important to do that. Finally, my least favourite example of solving arguments with people is the type where you will not be solving squat, and that is when you are dating a narcissistic individual. So let's go through the characteristics really quickly. You are someone who gaslights you, makes you feel like you're going crazy for doing things that you never did. The people that, make you feel like you're stepping on eggshells, have black and white thinking, it's their way or the highway. They can be abusive, emotionally, mentally, call you names, criticize you, and sometimes physically abusive to you too. You may point out that they've done something wrong, like they're eyeing a waiter at a restaurant and that it didn't make you feel comfortable, and then they lash out at you verbally, emotionally, or even physically because you've hit their shame. And whenever they're in an argument with you, they're always right. You could never do right by them. Now, it's true that narcissistic patterns of behaviour can run rampant in society, and that it's not exclusive to people who have narcissistic personality disorder. So I want to make it very clear that it's not like the behaviours that I just listed are exclusive to this cluster of personalities. People who have good qualities to them may also exhibit these behaviours as a way of protecting themselves when they get uncomfortable. And it's important to realise too that in addition to criticism, stonewalling, blaming, gaslighting, passive aggressiveness are all things that will erode a relationship quicker than anything else I know. It's the little things that cut the most and often destroy a relationship, because it's those hurts that build up over time that lead to resentment, leads to cheating, leads to problems. So let's cut straight to the case. Usually when you're in an argument with a person who's narcissistic, they will debate you tooth and claw. It'll feel like you're debating a lawyer, or it might even feel like, if you've ever done this in school, you're in like a debating competition with someone, and no matter what you say and what evidence you bring to the table, God help you, you're wrong all the time. And you may even believe it too. You may even think, oh, I'm the problem. I'm the bad person. I'm, clearly a bad individual. I need to go to therapy, when in fact they probably need to go to therapy, although the therapy they would need is unfortunately nowhere to be found, because there is no fixing that kind of behaviour yet. And I think the key message that I want to get you here is there is no fixing an argument like that. If someone's not willing to hold space for you, to acknowledge that they've done something wrong and to take responsibility for their actions, then there's really not much you can do about that. And it's important to understand that that is a dead-end situation. And in situations like that, this is where, unfortunately, you're with someone who is not willing to advance with you in the relationship. They would rather push you to a place of feeling insecure, feeling like you're stepping on eggshells and there's nothing you can do that's right. And as a consequence, you will probably feel like there is no safety in this relationship. A key part of most relationships is to feel physically and emotionally safe, and if you can't feel that with your partner, why the hell are you with them? It might sound harsh, but it's something that you have to ask yourself, because at the end of the day, we as human beings need to intrinsically feel safe in our relationships. Narcissistic behaviour is something which I feel deserves videos on its own, but I think for the time being, I'm going to leave this here, because I've done a lot of content on narcissistic behaviour, even with colleagues of mine too. And I'll wrap this up now by saying that when it comes to solving problems in relationships, again, it's not just about communicating better, it's about understanding what kind of problems you have and also working out how to work through those challenges so that way you can restore safety, trust, and peace within your relationships.